Hi everyone, this is going to be a continuation of our lesson on phrases. This is going to be lesson number 2. So please make sure you have split your screen or printed out your guided notes with a pen and paper on the side. If you did not print them out, you can go ahead and of course fill them out here on your screen using the split screen method that I've taught you before. All right, as we learned last time, a phrase is a group of words that act as a single part of speech. We talked about prepositional phrases, which begin with a preposition and can act as adjectives or adverbs. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about those specific types of prepositional phrases that act like adjectives and adverbs, and how are you going to be able to tell when it's an adjective or when it's an adverb? And more importantly, how are you going to be able to use that in your own writing? All right. So, a prepositional phrase that acts as an adjective or an adjective, or I'm sorry, or is an adjective phrase. So, if a phrase that starts with a preposition is acting like an adjective, which we'll go over more in a minute, then we consider that an adjective phrase. You could call it an adjective prepositional phrase, but that's just a lot. We already know that adjective phrases are a type of prepositional phrase. So again, if the prepositional phrase acts like an adjective, then it is called an adjective phrase. We need to remember a few things about adjectives. We've gone over all the different parts of speech, and we all know what an adjective is. If you remember as comp, which tells you the order of adjectives, but it also tells you a little bit more about what they are: your attitude or your opinion on something, the color, the origin, the size, the material, the purpose. These are all types of words that describe nouns, and that's what an adjective does. It describes the noun. But most specifically, an adjective will answer questions for us. It will tell us what kind of something, how many of something, which one of something, or how much of something. Okay, so it will describe these or answer these questions for us. So you do have this chart on your notes. You do need to go ahead and fill that in and think about what you're writing when you're writing it. So adjectives tell us what kind, which one, how many, and how much. You can go ahead and pause this now so you can fill that in on your guided notes. Let's take a look at our example. The store with the neon sign is open. I could just say the store is open, but I'm not giving my listener, any more information. What if there's lots of stores that we could be talking about? So maybe we're standing there in the street and I say the store is open, and the person I'm talking to says which one. So how I become more specific is by adding in an adjective phrase. The store with the neon sign is open. So this adjective phrase with the neon sign tells us which one. All right, what I'd like for you guys to do is what we've been doing again in lesson 1. I'd like you to go ahead and highlight in the following sentences the phrases. So go ahead and pause this video now and highlight the phrases in these 4 sentences. All right, how did you do? Let's take a look. The first letters of the word rest, ice, compression, and elevation form the abbreviation RICE. The prepositional phrase is of the words rest, ice, compression, and elevation. All right, we start with of and we end with elevation because the next word, form, that's a verb. It's how you do. It's something that you do. You form it. So that's a verb. It can't be a part of our phrase. Number 2, ice helps because it deadens the pain and slows the loss of blood. Of blood is your phrase. It's comes after the word loss here. So, and it starts with a preposition of and it ends because the sentence ends. Number 3, ice also reduces swelling of the injured area. Of the injured area is our phrase. It starts with a preposition of and ends because the sentence ends. Number 4, compression with a tight bandage of elastic prevents further strain. This actually has 2 phrases. We have with a tight bandage, starting with the preposition with, ending in bandage. And that's because the next word is the start of a new phrase, of elastic, of being the preposition, elastic being the end, because the next word is a verb, prevents. So nothing new here yet. Now, if the phrases here are adjectives, which they are, where are the words that they modify? You can answer this on your guided notes. So you're going to go back to the same part, and this time I want you to underline the words that these phrases are modifying, meaning which word are they describing? So go ahead and pause this video now and give that a try. Remember, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay if you don't know. That's what learning's all about. All right, so let's see how you did. Letters. Letters is the word that's being modified. The first letters of what? Of the words rest, ice, compression, and elevation. So this is answering the question, which one? Which letters, right? So letters is the word that's being modified. Number 2, loss. Okay, so it's the loss of blood. So of blood is answering the question, what? What loss? Okay, loss is a noun. It's an abstract noun. If you remember us talking about that, it's one of those things that you can't touch, but it is a feeling, it's a sense. All right, number 3, ice can also reduce swelling. Swelling of what? What swelling or which type of swelling? Of the injured area. Okay. Compression is being modified by with a tight bandage. Okay. What type of compression? Compression with a tight bandage. And then bandage, which is, yes, part of this phrase, but it's also the word that's being modified by the next phrase, a bandage. Which type of bandage? Of elastic. Okay. So again, you need to remember that adjective phrases tell us what kind, which one, how many, or how much. Another thing that you might have noticed about all of these is that an adjective phrase always comes after the word that it modifies. So if you're not sure what word it's modifying, find the phrase and look at the word right in front of it. As long as that word right in front of the phrase is a noun, you're fine, right? So let's go back and look. Of the words rest, ice, compression, and elevation, if you got that, look at the word right in front of it. Letters. Of blood, look at the word right in front of it. Loss. Of the injured area, look at the word right in front. Swelling. With a tight bandage, look at the word right in front. Compression. Of elastic, look at the word right in front. Bandage. So again, adjective phrases always come after the word it modifies. And that word has to be a noun because adjectives, of course, modify nouns. All right, so let's go on to our next type of prepositional phrase. A prepositional phrase that acts as an adverb is called an adverb phrase. Again, very important for us to remember. Adverbs modify verbs, but they can also modify other adjectives, okay, or other adverbs. However, for the time being right now, let us focus on the fact that adverbs modify verbs. They tell us more information about verbs, okay? So they tell us when something happens, where something happens, why something happens, how long or how often something happens. They also can tell us to what extent something happens. For example, we got our new puppy at the animal shelter. Where did we get our new puppy? That is being answered by our adverb phrase there, at the animal shelter. It's answering where we got something. That action of getting, it's telling us where we got it. So let's again narrow this down. We've done this many times before. I'm not asking you to tell me if it's adjective or adverb yet. I only want you to go ahead and highlight in these sentences the phrases. So go ahead and pause this video on your guided notes, highlight the phrases. All right, let's see how you did. Number 1, when he was only a baby, Pecos Bill fell into the Pecos River. All right, that I should be highlighted, but you get the point there. The phrase is into the Pecos River. It starts with the preposition into, and it ends at river because that's the end of the sentence. Number 2, his parents searched for him but couldn't find him. The phrase is for him, starts with the preposition for, ends with him because, of course, but is a conjunction connecting us to a new verb. Okay. Number 3, he was saved by coyotes who raised him. By is the phrase as a preposition, and it ends with coyotes because we see a punctuation mark there. So phrases will end if you have a punctuation mark. Number 4, he thought for many years he was a coyote. For many years is your phrase. It starts with for, it ends with years because the word after is a subject, he, that connects to the verb was. He was. So you cannot include that in your phrase. All right. Adverbs modify verbs, so do adverb phrases. Underline the verbs that each phrase modifies. Do this on your guided notes. Well, lucky you guys, I've already done it for you here. Okay, these are a bit trickier. So when you have an adverb phrase, you have to remember that it's answering the questions how, where, when, how often, how long, why, to an action. So we're no longer modifying nouns, we're modifying actions. So look at number one. When he was only a baby, Pecos Bill fell. Fell is the action, and into the Pecos River is telling us where he fell. Okay. Number two, his parents searched. Searched is the action. Searched for what? For him. Number three, saved. Saved is the action. How was he saved? By coyotes. Thought. Thought is the action in number four. Thought what? Or thought for how long or to what extent? For many years. All right. What I want you to notice about these is that we can actually move adverb phrases around in a sentence. We can't do that with adjective phrases. Adjective phrases have to come right after the word that they modify. But adverb phrases can be moved around in a sentence and still maintain that sentence making sense. So look at number one, for example, here. I can move that around. I can say, into the Pecos River, Pecos Bill fell, right? I can move that around still. Look at number two. For him, his parents searched. Now, that might not sound so great and it might not sound natural, but I can still do it, and the sentence still maintains its meaning. I haven't changed its meaning by moving around that sentence. Okay? So, what's important for you to realize with an adverb phrase is that you can move the phrase around in a sentence without changing the meaning of the sentence. Then the phrase is an adverb phrase. You cannot move adjective phrases, it wouldn't work. But adverb phrases, you can. Did I say that right? You cannot move adjective phrases, but you can move adverb phrases. This also does make it a little bit trickier to find the word that it's modifying because it doesn't necessarily have to be right next to the word that it's modifying. If you're a writer who struggles with getting your point across, you might want to always make sure that your phrases are next to the word that it modifies, just so that you don't have something called dangling modifier, which we talk about later on. And it just helps your meaning a lot more. So if you're new to writing, you don't feel that confident with it, then stick to trying to keep your own modifiers close to the words that they modify. Just note that it doesn't always work like that with other people's writing. So if you're having to identify adverb phrases and the word that they modify, it's not always going to be the word that's right in front of it or behind it. Adverb phrases can move around. All right. So I want you guys to go ahead and pause the video here before we go on to this part, because I'd like for you to go ahead and go back to your notes, make sure everything's filled in okay, make sure you have an understanding of the difference between an adjective and an adverb phrase, because when we come back, we're going to try and to identify these prepositional phrases as either adjective or adverb. So pause the video now and go back to your notes and refresh your mind. Okay. So your job now is to identify the phrases, number one, by highlighting them. And then I'd like you to go ahead and write whether or not the phrase is an adjective by writing ADJ next to it, or an adverb by writing ADV. In order for you to know if it's an adjective or adverb, you're also going to have to identify what word it's modifying. So number one, highlight the phrase. Number two, try to identify the word that it's modifying. And finally, number three, try to tell me if it's an adjective or adverb. So you can pause this video now, go back to your guided notes, and do this on your guided notes. All right, so let's see how you did. First, let's do the first two parts. Of shark species is the phrase that is modifying the word hundreds. Okay, because it's modifying the word hundreds, is hundreds a noun or a verb? It's a noun, it's a thing, it's a number, it's how many, right? And not only that, but it's telling us which kind of hundreds or which one. So we would say that this is an adjective phrase. Let's take a look at number two. Scientists group these species into 28 families. Into 28 families is the phrase. It is modifying the word group. It's not modifying species because it's not telling us which species. It's modifying group is because it's telling us how. How did they group them? They grouped them into 28 families. So we would say that this is an adverb phrase. If you found yourself stuck with this, you could also take a look and see if you can switch around that phrase. Could you move that phrase somewhere else? Can I start the sentence with this? Into 28 families, scientists grouped these species. I could absolutely do that. That didn't change the meaning at all. And because I can move that phrase around, that makes it an adverb phrase. Go back to number one and see if you can move around number one. Could I say, of shark species, did you know that there are hundreds? No, that wouldn't make any sense, right? That would be a dangling modifier because you have to have of shark species next to the hundreds. It goes next to the word that it's modifying. It has to go together. Number three, within the same family. Within the same family is modifying the word sharks. It's telling you which ones. All right. And because it's modifying the word sharks, which is, of course, a noun, we would say that this is an adjective. There it is, an adjective phrase. Number four, sharks are found throughout the world's oceans. I have underlined are found. You could underline just found, but you have to remember that are is a part of a verb. It's the helping verb. Are is the helping verb, found is the main verb. So are found is a verb. So this is telling us where. Where are sharks found? So our phrase is telling us where sharks are found, and because it's answering the question where, we know that that's an adverb. Okay? I believe that's it, you guys. So please make sure you go back to your guided notes and go ahead and make sure that you have done the reflection. Make sure that you have written down any additional questions you might have for me. And again, you can send those to me on your mind. You can email me with them, or you can ask them next time we're in class.